Ethan grew up in Millfield, a small, rural town where everyone knew each other's stories before they even happened. At 24, he worked at the local hardware store, stacking lumber and ringing up nails for folks who'd seen him grow from a toddler into a hardworking young man. Life wasn't grand, but it was steady and familiar, and Ethan valued that simplicity. He had dreams, too, mostly revolving around Ava, his girlfriend of 2 years. Ava was everything to him, with her bright, curly hair and a laugh that lit up even the dullest days. Ethan was quietly saving money to buy her an engagement ring. Nothing flashy, just a simple token to say, "I'm yours, and you're mine." That summer, Ethan took on a tough 3-week hay-hauling job out of town to earn extra money. The work was exhausting, but he kept Ava in his thoughts, picturing her smile when he'd come back with enough to start their future. Every night, he'd call her from an old payphone, her voice a gentle comfort amid the weariness. He couldn't wait to get back, knowing he was one step closer to making a life with her. But when he finally returned to Millfield, the world he knew had turned upside down. Ethan felt a rush of excitement as his old truck rattled down the familiar streets of Millfield. The smell of freshly cut grass and the sight of the sun setting over the rolling fields made him feel at home again. After 3 long weeks of grueling work, he had saved up enough to open a small savings account, maybe even take Ava out somewhere nice. His first stop was Ava's house, a cozy little cottage with wildflowers growing in the front yard. As he approached, Ethan noticed the house looked unusually quiet. He knocked on the door, and Ava's mother answered, her face tight with worry. "She's not here, Ethan," she said shortly, avoiding his gaze. "You'd better talk to your family." Confused and uneasy, Ethan thanked her and walked back to his truck, his heart thudding painfully. When he arrived at his family's small farmhouse, Ethan could hear the noise before he even opened the door. Laughter, voices, and the clinking of dishes filled the air. As he stepped inside, his mother, Margaret, barely glanced his way, busy giving orders to his older brother Caleb, who was leaning casually against the counter, grinning. That's when Ethan saw it, the shiny gold band on Caleb's hand. "Where's Ava?" Ethan demanded, his voice tight with panic. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and turned to face him. "She's with Caleb now," she said firmly. "They're engaged. It's done." Ethan's mind reeled, unable to comprehend the words. He looked at Caleb, who smirked, clearly enjoying Ethan's shock. "What are you talking about?" Ethan nearly shouted. Margaret sighed, as if explaining something obvious. Ava needed someone reliable, someone strong. Caleb's got a good job lined up with the county. You're still chasing small jobs and pipe dreams, Ethan. She deserves stability. Ethan couldn't believe it. He had worked so hard to make something of himself, to build a life with Ava, and his own family had pulled it out from under him. "You think I'm not good enough?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. Caleb just shrugged. "Face it, little brother." She picked the better man. Fury and heartbreak twisted together inside Ethan, and before he knew it, he was out the door, driving through town without a destination. When his mind cleared, he found himself at Ava's house again. This time, Ava was there, sitting on the porch with her head in her hands. When she looked up and saw him, tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Your mom, she said Caleb would take care of me, that you weren't ready. I didn't know what to do." "You didn't know what to do?" Ethan repeated bitterly. You could have waited. You could have called me. Ava sobbed, reaching for him, but he pulled back, shaking his head. The girl he had fought for, dreamed of, was gone, and Ethan realized he couldn't fight this anymore. He turned around and walked away, leaving Ava's apologies behind. That night, Ethan packed a small bag and left Millfield, knowing he couldn't stay in a place that had taken everything from him. As his truck rolled out of town, Ethan promised himself one thing. He wouldn't let them break him. He'd find a place where he could start over, where his worth wasn't measured by someone else's opinion. Ethan drove through the night, unsure of where he was headed. As the miles passed and the small town of Millfield faded behind him, he felt a strange mix of freedom and grief. His whole life had been rooted there, and now he had no choice but to leave it all behind. When dawn broke, Ethan found himself on the outskirts of Bridgeport, a bustling city that felt like a world away from his quiet hometown. He parked his old truck behind a small diner and tried to get some rest, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind kept replaying the betrayal, Caleb's smirk, his mother's cold words, and Ava's tearful confession. The first few days in Bridgeport were rough. Ethan had little money, no place to stay, and no idea what to do next. He spent nights sleeping in his truck, his old duffel bag as a makeshift pillow. During the day, he wandered the city, looking for work. Most places turned him away, unimpressed by his worn-out clothes and weary eyes. Just when his hope was wearing thin, Ethan saw a help wanted sign at a warehouse down by the river. Desperate, he walked in and asked for a job. Rick, the gruff warehouse manager with a permanent scowl, looked Ethan up and down. "You ever hauled crates before?" Rick asked. Ethan nodded, even though he'd only moved hay and lumber. "All right," Rick grunted. "We need strong backs and quiet mouths. Be here tomorrow at 6. The work was brutal. Heavy crates, long hours, and Rick's constant barking. But Ethan kept his head down, pushing through the pain, determined not to quit. At night, he'd return to his truck, sore and exhausted. But at least he had a job. After a few weeks, he saved enough to rent a tiny room at a rundown motel, which felt like a luxury compared to the cramped cab of his truck. One evening after his shift, Ethan spotted a flyer taped to a utility pole outside the warehouse. Night classes, learn a trade, build a future. Something about it sparked a fire in him. Maybe this was the chance he needed to prove himself, not to his family, but to himself. He signed up for a basic computer course at the community college, figuring it couldn't hurt. On the first night, Ethan found himself in a classroom filled with people from all walks of life. That's when he met Zoe, a spirited young woman with short brown hair and a contagious laugh. She sat next to him, and when they were paired up for a group assignment, Ethan couldn't help but feel grateful for the distraction. As they struggled through a spreadsheet tutorial, Zoe offered him a kind smile. "You look like you've been through the ringer," she teased. Ethan chuckled, surprised at how easy it was to talk to her. They ended up at a nearby coffee shop after class, sharing stories about their lives. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt something other than pain. He felt hope. Over time, Zoe became more than just a classmate. She became a friend, someone who listened without judgment and encouraged him to keep moving forward. As the days turned into months, Ethan found himself changing, slowly rebuilding the pieces of his life. He still thought of Millfield sometimes, the life he'd lost, the people who'd hurt him. But with each new step in Bridgeport, he felt himself growing stronger, more resilient. Maybe, just maybe, he was finding a new path. One that didn't revolve around proving himself to anyone but himself. Months passed, and Bridgeport slowly started to feel like home. Ethan was no longer the lost, broken man who had left Millfield. He had routine, purpose, and most importantly, he had hope again. The computer classes turned out to be a lot more interesting than he expected, and Zoe's positive energy pushed him to keep learning even when he wanted to give up. One evening after class, Zoe handed Ethan a flyer for a local startup that was looking for warehouse assistants. "They're pretty new, but they're growing fast," she explained. "You might get more out of it than that dusty old warehouse job." The company, Tech Hive Solutions, was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The office was buzzing with energy. Young people in hoodies and jeans working on sleek computers, brainstorming, and building gadgets. Ethan hesitated at the entrance, feeling completely out of place, but Zoe nudged him forward. He was interviewed by Tim, one of the project managers, a tall, skinny guy with glasses. "We're looking for someone who isn't afraid of hard work and can help keep things organized," Tim explained. Ethan admitted he didn't have much experience with technology, but he knew how to work hard and learn fast. Tim gave him a thoughtful look before saying, "All right, you're in. We could use someone with your attitude." At first, Ethan's job was mostly physical: unloading supplies, setting up workspaces, and keeping the clutter under control. But he couldn't help but watch the programmers and engineers as they worked, their screens filled with lines of code and blueprints. Tim noticed Ethan's interest and started giving him small tasks: labeling equipment, managing inventory on the computer, and even assisting with testing some prototypes. One evening, while working late, Tim caught Ethan staring at a half-assembled device on the workbench. "You curious?" Tim asked, handing him a pair of gloves. "Help me out with this." They spent the next few hours troubleshooting the gadget, Tim explaining bits and pieces as they worked. By the end of the night, Ethan not only felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a growing fascination with how things worked. Zoe was thrilled to hear about his progress, encouraging him to take on more challenges. "You're smarter than you think, Ethan," she said one night over dinner. "You just never had the chance to prove it." Slowly but surely, Ethan started to believe it too. His days at Tech Hive became more than just a job. He was learning, not just about technology, but about himself. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was running away from his past. He was building something real and tangible, and he was proud of that. Then one day, Tim approached Ethan with a surprising offer. "We're expanding, and I need someone to manage the operations side, keeping the logistics in line, coordinating shipments. You've been doing half the job already without realizing it. What do you say?" Ethan couldn't believe it. He hesitated, unsure if he was capable, but Tim gave him an encouraging nod. "You've earned it, man. You've put in the work. Trust yourself." Taking a deep breath, Ethan agreed. The title felt foreign at first, operations manager, but as he shook Tim's hand, he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer the guy who let life beat him down. He was someone who fought back, who chose to move forward. For the first time since leaving Millfield, Ethan wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they fueled his determination to keep building a life on his own terms. A year later, Ethan had settled into his new role as operations manager at TechHive Solutions. The startup had grown rapidly, gaining attention for its innovative gadgets and sleek mobile apps. Ethan's ability to keep the warehouse running smoothly while coordinating logistics with precision made him indispensable to the team. One afternoon, as Ethan was going over shipment schedules, Tim walked into his office with a grin. "You're not going to believe this," Tim said, tossing a glossy magazine onto Ethan's desk. On the cover was TechHive's latest product, and the headline read, "The Startup Revolutionizing Smart Home Tech." Tim slapped Ethan on the back. "We made it, man. Investors are pouring in. We're expanding nationwide." Ethan couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. All those long nights, the doubts, the relentless hard work, it was all paying off. "We're going to need a bigger space," Ethan noted, flipping through the magazine. Tim nodded. "And we're going to need someone to oversee it. I'm thinking that could be you." The offer caught Ethan off guard. Oversee the expansion, manage the entire logistics network? It was daunting, but he could feel that fire inside reigniting. "I'll do it," he said, shaking Tim's hand firmly. That night, Ethan couldn't wait to share the news with Zoe. They had kept their relationship light at first, but as time went on, it grew into something deeper. Over dinner at their favorite diner, Zoe's eyes lit up when Ethan told her. "You've earned this, Ethan," she said, squeezing his hand. "You never gave up, even when the world tried to break you." Not long after, TechHive moved into a sprawling industrial space, bustling with new employees and state-of-the-art equipment. Ethan dove into his new role, streamlining processes and hiring a reliable team. The chaos felt manageable now, and Ethan thrived under the pressure. One evening, as he was wrapping up for the day, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Hesitating, he picked it up. "Ethan?" a woman's voice asked. "It's Lily." His heart lurched, memories rushing back. I heard you're doing well." "Mom mentioned it," she said, her voice shaky. "I just wanted to say I'm happy for you." Ethan took a moment to process the unexpected call. He couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. "Thanks, Lily," he replied evenly. "I hope you're doing okay." There was a pause. Then Lily sighed. "I'm managing. Things aren't exactly how I thought they'd be. I just wanted to let you know that I'm proud of you." After hanging up, Ethan sat in silence. It wasn't anger he felt anymore, just a quiet acceptance. The pain that had once consumed him was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. He had moved on, and that realization was liberating. Back at home, Zoe noticed his thoughtful expression. "You okay?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him. Ethan smiled, pulling her close. "Yeah, I think I finally let go." TechHive continued to flourish, and Ethan's reputation as a leader grew. Investors took note, and the company's influence spread. Yet, through all the success, Ethan never lost sight of how far he had come. He knew that every step he had taken was a choice to rise above his past. One evening, as he watched the city lights flicker from his office window, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. Bridgeport had become more than just an escape. It had become his future, and he had built it with his own hands, proving that even after losing everything, it was possible to rebuild stronger than before. Ethan's life had transformed beyond recognition. As operations manager at TechHive Solutions, he had overseen the company's growth from a small startup to a major player in smart home technology. The once hesitant, heartbroken guy from Millfield was now a confident leader, guiding a team of hardworking individuals. He had gained respect, stability, and purpose. One evening, as he was finishing up paperwork in his office, Tim knocked on the door, his face unusually serious. "Hey, Ethan, I need to talk to you about something big." Ethan set down his pen, intrigued. "What's up?" Tim hesitated before finally saying, "I'm moving on to a new project, something overseas. The investors are looking for someone to take over as CEO, and I recommended you." Ethan's mind raced. "CEO? Him?" "Tim, are you sure about this?" he asked, still processing the news. Tim smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. "You've been running half the place already, Ethan. You've got the team's respect and the vision to take us further. Don't doubt yourself." That night, Ethan shared the news with Zoe. They were sitting on their small apartment balcony, city lights stretching out before them. Zoe looked at him, eyes wide with excitement. "CEO? Ethan, that's amazing," she said, pulling him into a hug. Ethan couldn't help but smile, but underneath the excitement was a nagging fear. Could he really handle it? Was he ready for that kind of responsibility? Zoe sensed his hesitation. "You've come so far," she said softly. "You've already proven yourself." The old Ethan might have doubted it, but not the man sitting here with me. "You can do this." With Zoe's encouragement, Ethan accepted the promotion. The next few months were a whirlwind. Ethan found himself immersed in meetings, strategy sessions, and late-night brainstorming. The pressure was immense, but Ethan faced it head-on, drawing on the resilience he had built through his struggles. The company's success continued to grow, and so did Ethan's confidence in his ability to lead. One evening, after a particularly successful product launch, Ethan found himself reflecting on his journey. He remembered the long nights in his truck, wondering if he would ever make something of himself. He thought about the heartbreak that had driven him from Millfield and how he had once felt like a failure. Now, standing in his office, overlooking the city that had given him a second chance, Ethan realized how much he had changed. That weekend, Zoe suggested they take a break from the hustle and spend a day at the park with their daughter Mia. Watching Mia run through the grass, laughing and chasing butterflies, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Zoe sat beside him on the picnic blanket, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're amazing. You know that?" she whispered. Ethan smiled, squeezing her hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he replied. Zoe chuckled. "You would have found your way. I just made sure you didn't give up on yourself." As Mia came running over, clutching a dandelion, Ethan picked her up and spun her around, her giggles echoing in the warm air. In that moment, Ethan knew he had finally found his place, not just as a CEO or a successful man, but as a husband and father. He had built a life full of love and purpose, far from the pain of his past. Bridgeport had become his home, not because of the success, but because of the family and the life he had created there. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the park, Ethan knew he had conquered not just his fears, but the doubt that once held him back. He was no longer defined by what he had lost, but by everything he had gained through perseverance and heart. Years passed, and Ethan's life continued to flourish. As the CEO of Tech Hive Solutions, he had led the company through major expansions, opening offices across the country and even venturing into international markets. His once small, hesitant team had grown into a thriving community of innovators, all inspired by his story of resilience and determination. One evening, while preparing a presentation for a major conference, Ethan received a message from an unknown number. Curious, he opened it and saw a familiar name, Caleb. The text was brief. "Mom's not doing well. Thought you should know." For a moment, Ethan just stared at his phone, memories of betrayal bubbling up. Zoe noticed his furrowed brow and asked, "What's wrong?" Ethan hesitated before explaining, and Zoe placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should go," she said softly, "if nothing else, for your own peace of mind." The next morning, Ethan found himself driving back to Millfield, the place he had left behind so many years ago. As he pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, he felt a strange mix of familiarity and unease. The house looked smaller than he remembered, worn down and quiet. Margaret, his mother, was sitting in a faded armchair by the window, her face paler and thinner than he remembered. Caleb was there too, looking older and more tired than the arrogant brother Ethan once knew. Margaret looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ethan," she whispered, voice cracking. There was an awkward silence before Caleb spoke. "She's been asking for you," he muttered, not meeting Ethan's gaze. Ethan swallowed his pride, stepping closer. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. Margaret's lips trembled as she reached for his hand. I'm sorry," she whispered, eyes welling with tears. "I didn't know how to fix it. I thought I was doing what was best." Ethan took a deep breath, feeling years of anger and hurt fighting to resurface. But as he looked at his mother, frail, regretful, and vulnerable, he realized he wasn't that wounded young man anymore. He was stronger, wiser, and in control of his own life. "It's okay, Mom," he said gently. "We all make mistakes." Caleb shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to react. He finally looked at Ethan, his voice low. "I messed up too. I never thought about how it hurt you. I'm sorry." Ethan nodded, acknowledging the apology. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Ethan stayed for a few days, helping around the house and sharing stories of his family back in Bridgeport. When it was time to leave, Margaret hugged him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. Caleb offered a brief, grateful nod. "Take care of yourself," Ethan said before heading back to his car. On the drive home, Ethan felt a sense of closure. The pain from the past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had faced his demons, forgiven those who hurt him, and reclaimed his own happiness. When he arrived back in Bridgeport, Zoe was waiting on the porch. Mia and their new baby, Jack, playing in the yard. Zoe wrapped her arms around him, sensing his calm. "How did it go?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly. "Better than I expected. I think I finally made peace with it." That night, as the family sat around the dinner table, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. His journey had been long and painful, but it had led him to a place of strength, love, and purpose. He knew he had built a life worth fighting for, one filled with forgiveness, new beginnings, and the unwavering support of the people who truly mattered. Ethan's story teaches us a profound lesson about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of self-worth. Life doesn't always go as planned, and sometimes the people closest to us can become the source of our greatest pain. However, instead of allowing betrayal to define his future, Ethan chose to take control of his own destiny. He didn't let bitterness consume him. Instead, he focused on self-improvement, embracing new opportunities, and building a life that reflected his strength and determination. In the end, he discovered that true success is not just about professional achievements, but also about finding peace within and learning to forgive those who once hurt us. Real-life application. Many of us encounter moments when life seems to fall apart, whether it's a failed relationship, a betrayal, or a setback at work. In those moments, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and defeated. But like Ethan, we have a choice. We can choose to dwell on the hurt or use it as motivation to rebuild ourselves. The key is to take small, consistent steps toward improvement and surround ourselves with people who believe in our potential. Whether it's pursuing a new career, learning a new skill, or simply focusing on personal growth, moving forward despite challenges can lead to a fulfilling and happier life.